it's not just about meeting people. Like a network is great, but if you're not adding value to these people's lives, then it really isn't that meaningful. You've got to find ways to address the problems that they're dealing with and help them understand that you're about the relationship, not about the transaction.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I'm your host, as always, Yona Weiss. Excited to be here today, as every day, because every day there's a lot of exciting things out there, but grateful every day, right? You gotta be grateful. I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but without further ado, I'd love to introduce today's guest, none other than Tayler Tibbitts, all the way from Idaho. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm also grateful to be here.
It's always a pleasure. Yeah, it's a pleasure to meet people in the... Exactly, yeah. So many amazing people in this industry you get to meet through social media, and then they come, to life when you meet them at conferences and then do podcasts and have great conversations with them. So I'd love for our listeners who may not know who you are, what you do, for you to give a brief kind of background, who you are, what you do, and then we'll get into it.
Absolutely. So I'm a real estate attorney by trade, graduated from law school in 2013, but it didn't take me long to kind of find myself looking for something a little bit different. I'm kind of a networky business development type attorney, and I fell into the world of title insurance and escrow services in 2015, and had a boss that, well, he recruited me, became my boss, saw something in me, gave me a shot to help him build a commercial department within a small title agent in the Boise, Idaho area. And then over time, just gained an expertise in real estate law, title insurance, escrow, with a specific focus on commercial. And over the course of my career since then, it's been very heavy on commercial real estate. And most of that time has been in the title insurance world. I did take a hiatus to run my own law firm for a couple of years, which was a great time. And I learned a ton from doing that. But I boomeranged back into the world of title and escrow in 2019. And from then to 2022, we enjoyed 3 of the best years that the industry's ever seen. And then 2 of the most challenging years since then. But a couple of years ago, I had an opportunity to take over running the state of Idaho for Fidelity National Title, the nation's leading title insurance company from a market share standpoint. We have a smallish operation here in the state, but it's growing. And it's been a great opportunity for me to apply what I've learned over the course of my career and be able to be challenged in a lot of different ways, especially with the leadership opportunities that this position has presented.
Wow. Sounds amazing. I mean, first of all, no one has a straight path to where they get to. And
winding road.
But it's amazing that it's really taking you back to, the commercial real estate world. Fidelity, obviously, a huge player in the space. And the fact that you're able to kind of cover the whole state of Idaho, which is one of the biggest, most rapidly growing states in terms of population, in terms of job growth, and there's a lot of opportunity. There's a ton of open land, right?
There is.
And there's a lot of development.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities here. I think Idaho wasn't really on a lot of people's radar for a long time. People are like, oh yeah, Idaho. I've been to Iowa before. I actually have a theory around it. 2007 is when Boise State beat University of Oklahoma in the Fiesta Bowl, and the blue turf really, was highlighted. And everyone was impressed by that game, the special finish. And we actually saw a lot of activity around Boise State, more students coming, et cetera. And then all of a sudden, these students are bringing their parents and grandparents to the Valley. And then everyone's like, oh, this city's actually pretty cool. And I'm sure that wasn't the only driver, but really from 2007 to now, over the last 17 years, the city has seen so much growth.
Absolutely.
And yeah, COVID, everything, there's a lot of different factors there. But yeah, the Boise State effect, I think, is a thing.
For sure. And the state in general as well. There's a lot going on. A lot of other places, Twin Falls, and a lot of places that are kind of growing. I've seen a lot of clients that, own and buy properties, develop in the area, and several that have actually been on the show as well. So we got some friends in common in the Boise. I learned how to say Boise properly instead of like everyone else, says just Boise, and it's fun. Actually, I traveled to Boise when I was 16. I went on a trip, like a western coast trip of the United States, where we went to California, Nevada, Idaho, Utah, Washington, Oregon, and back down to California. I grew up in California, so it was a great trip. It was like a 3-week trip and got to see a lot of amazing places. And Boise is one of those cities we visited. So I got to see it firsthand, but haven't been back since.
Yeah, well, you're welcome back anytime.
One of these days, I'll make it back. One of these days, for sure. But yeah, it's really, really great to hear about it. Obviously, our company, Madison, is very involved in the title space. I've not so involved personally on that side of the business, but I definitely see it come up a lot. But I'd love to hear, from you, someone who's been involved, especially from the attorney's perspective, what that is actually like because it's like one of those things, title insurance, that everyone knows you have to do, but doesn't really understand why. Like, what's the point? Like, why are we actually getting this done? And why do we have to pay all this money to get this done every single time we close a property?
It's a great question. There's definitely some history there. I mean, I myself went to law school, didn't have any idea what title insurance companies do. And even after practicing as an attorney for a couple of years and starting with a title company, like there was a huge learning curve there because it is a segment of the real estate industry that's just not that well known. But the history lesson is that attorneys originally were providing opinions about a real property's title. And so they would go down to the county courthouse, search the records, and then based off of their research, try to clear up any issues clouding title and give an opinion about the validity of the title. And there was no insurance protection going forward aside from an attorney's E&O policy, which anyone who's sued a law firm knows, like it's not that easy to recover there. And so over time, this title insurance concept came to be where, a title officer searches the real property records. They ascertain what's encumbering the property, provided in a report, and then the parties are able to review those items and see whether or not they're comfortable with them. And if they're not, figure out what you do to get them removed from title. And then ultimately, upon closing, the title insurance company will insure or indemnify their insureds that if anything comes up outside of those exceptions, then the title insurance company will provide that coverage there if there's a claim. And then we typically will partner with escrow within our business. Most states it's title and escrow. Some states like California, it's separate. But the escrow officer is going to be the ones that coordinate the financial aspect of the real estate transaction, tallying the dollars and cents, preparing closing statements and other closing documents, and then really partnering with the title team to make sure that any issues that need to be resolved prior to closing on that title report are taken care of. And then once closing occurs, then we issue that title policy, and that's where the coverage kicks in.
Like any other insurance, it's one of those things that it's there to protect you. It's there, just in case something happens. But how likely is it that something will actually come to be, when, we have claims or things like that? I mean, how common have you actually seen claims come through title insurance?
Yeah, it's a great question. We definitely have claims, but that's part of the reason why the industry has taken a little heat over the last couple of years, especially under President Biden, as he's looking to reduce costs on barriers to ownership. He's taken, leveled it a little bit at the title insurance industry because our claims rate is so low. But you have to have kind of a fundamental shift in how you view title insurance as compared to other types of insurance. We're backward looking, and a lot of the work that we're doing is really done once closing occurs. Like if we're doing our job well, there should be zero claims because we're researching the records and making sure that everything is as everyone understands it to be with respect to the property, that there are no surprises. And we're not perfect, so sometimes title companies will miss some documents, or we get brought to the table when there's an issue to be resolved. And even if it's not totally the title company's fault, sometimes we're, involved in that solution if there is a claim. But our claims rate is less than 10%, which I think is unique in the insurance industry.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I would have even thought it was less than that.
It depends on the company and the state. But I mean, some areas are, even more like 5%, 6%.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, especially if you're dealing with properties that transact a lot, one of the things that is looked at, especially is, if there are other liens or things like that, and you never know. Yeah, totally clear. You may have owned the property and then sold it to someone and then bought it back, right? And you're like, I know this is totally, free and clear, everything. I did my research then, but you don't know that the guy in between, if he got any other liens on the property, et cetera, or maybe there are some outstanding bills, property tax, and all kinds of things like that would encumber you as the new buyer to handle. Yeah,
and there's some real estate fraud issues that are more and more prevalent as well. So sometimes people don't always know exactly what's going on with the title to their property. And not every county, which is really the kind of the custodian of the real property records across the country, not every county has the technology to alert parties to potential fraudulent activity. So having the title company look under the hood helps, and we really take pride in our industry in continuing to improve the real property records. So it's definitely kind of a nerdy thing, but the more we work and do good work in researching title and help parties clear up clouds on their title, the better the real property records get. And ultimately, maybe we work ourselves out of a job a little bit, right? If we continue to do a really good job and perfect the land records, then there's less of a need for title insurance. But like you said, ultimately, it's something that you need to do to make sure that you're covering some risks that, although are small, could be devastating if they were to arise.
For sure. I want to touch on something you kind of glossed over there, that, obviously the counties are the ones in charge of each, and not everyone is up to date on technology. That's something that I want to kind of press on a little bit.
For sure.
For goodness sake, it's 2024. And the fact that you have counties that are out there that are still using paper and don't have digital copies of everything, to me is just mind-boggling. Not only that, they don't even necessarily give you access online to anything. You have to go down personally or call them during their couple hours of business hours every day. I'm sorry for the rant here, but it's just something that seems totally illogical in this day and age.
Right. Well, and you get people who are going to say, say blockchain is going to disrupt title and escrow, or AI
for 10 years, right?
Title and escrow. And I'm like, look, for you or for me, that makes sense. Like, right, we see the application, but there are hundreds and hundreds of counties in the United States that still have paper records. Like, until that problem is solved, blockchain isn't going to disrupt the title research process. And every title company is working on implementing AI at some level, but there's just some really human aspects, and technology is probably 30 years behind. And I was talking about it today with an underwriter for Fidelity about building a title plan in a new county, and most of the records in that county are still on paper.
It's crazy. How many counties approximately are there in Idaho?
40.
40 counties.
I didn't have Idaho history in my fourth grade. I was in Utah for fourth grade, but I think we're down.
But that's huge. First of all, that's huge. And, every state has probably more or less at least that amount. Some smaller states may have fewer. But the fact that each one has its own property records, has its own kind of domain, its own municipality, everything like that, it's just mind-boggling that it can't be statewide to a certain extent as well, in terms of certain things just flowing, make it easier for people to do things. I don't know. But I totally agree with what you're saying about the disruption of it makes so much sense.
It's thing to see what happened. And title companies do really protect those real property records. They're called title plants. Mm-hmm. And most states require you to have your own title plant before you can be licensed to provide title insurance. And so it is a big barrier. You've got to build that title plant, build that repository of recorded documents, and then get licensed and be able to do this business. So some of it probably is the industry itself as well, being protective, not wanting things to move too quickly, because once public records are 100% available, anyone can search title, right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, it's not necessarily a bad thing. That's obviously will help people, but it could be, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? Does it open up the door to more fraudulent behavior potentially? And
yeah, it absolutely would. And you'd want experts. Most people don't know how to read the legal description. Mm-hmm. And if we're talking about a lot and block piece of property that's in a subdivision, like those legal descriptions are easy to read and understand how they fit together most of the time. But if you're reading a legal description that's been prepared by a surveyor or a section land, right. Good luck reviewing your own title and making sure that legal description ties together, right? You still need an expert to help with that.
For sure. So, there's obviously value there. And I think one of the things we always talk about in the show is underestimating value. Sometimes people don't realize how much value is provided to them for a service. Why does it cost this much or whatever? And surely there are things out there that are not worth it. But there are definitely things, especially when it comes to insurance and things like that, where you're paying for what you get. And that's the amazing thing about title insurance is it's regulated by the state in terms of the fee. So you're not like paying something, according to...
I'm coming up with an arbitrary number here. Yeah.
Exactly. Whereas, there are definitely other industries or other, even within insurance, that are not regulated per se. And you could be getting quotes all over the place.
Absolutely.
What are some of the ways, you're obviously working directly with commercial property owners, right? And I know you're a huge networker, as am I. But I'm curious
Yeah.
to know, because this is one of the things I love to talk about on the show also, is just tips, advice for people out there who are kind of newer to the industry, specifically regarding networking, right? What are some of the things that you like to do, whether it be follow up with potential clients, or whether it be, events and things like that? Just love to hear come on maybe different things that I may not be familiar with and love to implement myself and our listeners as
Yeah,
well.
absolutely, man. I love that side of our business. I think the human aspect of what we do is so much fun. And it's really what attracted me out of private law practice into the title insurance world, is the opportunity to be more focused on business development and marketing, really building something. And I took kind of a shotgun approach when I first got started. I didn't have a lot of strategy. The idea was to meet as many people as I could, build a network. And I came to learn that it didn't take very long in different networking groups or associations to find out who I connected with, who I didn't connect with. And so, really it was, joining a young professionals group. And then it was, trying out a leads group. Maybe it was finding a group of people that like to play golf. And eventually you start to kind of find the people that work well with you, find the personalities that resonate well. And then you start to build your network through those people. So you start to figure out who they like to spend time with, who they trust, who their business partners are. And that network kind of starts to connect, and you get some webs that kind of filter through. And now all of a sudden you're putting together a real estate transaction, and you know everybody on the deal, right? You know the listing agent, the selling agent, the lender. That's when you're like, all right, the work that I'm doing is coming together.
You definitely see that when you're dealing with a lot of, because in a commercial real estate deal, different from residential, is that there are a lot of players, right? There are a lot of people involved in getting that deal across the finish line, from the brokers, not just the buyers. You have attorneys, you have the title, you have people, other insurance, you have other vendors, things like that, getting it across the finish line. And when you can bring people together, whether it be through events or things like that, everyone's really kind of, like you talked about, that web. I mean, that's what it's called, networking, right? It's like a network. It's a web that just kind of interconnects. That's what I love about LinkedIn also, just for that matter, is that you're meeting people all over the place in every part of the industry and providing value in ways that you're learning.
That's right.
You're learning a tremendous amount. And then you're also learning about who does what. And therefore, how can I know, right? When I have someone in my network that needs something, who can I refer them to? How can I turn them to? I got a guy who's an office broker in Kentucky. Hey, I have a friend who reached out to me. He's like, hey, I have an office building in Kentucky that, I'm looking to sell, anyone interested? I'm like, I don't, but I have a broker who's amazing in the space, and I can just make that connection. He's like, okay, yeah, sure, that'd be great. And you never know when something like that's going to happen. Why? Because I know that guy who's, posting on LinkedIn, and we've had conversations, been on the podcast. I know what he does because we've had that networking. And therefore, when something of that comes up, it automatically triggers, because of the branding, because of that reiteration of what you do, it just shows up immediately in your mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you touch on a really great point, that it's not just about meeting people. Like, a network is great, but if you're not adding value to these people's lives, then it really isn't that meaningful. You've got to find ways to address the problems that they're dealing with and help them understand that you're about the relationship, not about the transaction.
It's such a fine line though, right? Because unless you really mean it, yeah, it comes across very clearly.
Can be salesy, right? Yeah.
Very clearly, right? Which is, I also, when I first got involved in sales and first got involved in that, I didn't know anything, and so I was just reading books. I was, listening to podcasts and things like that, and came across Grant Cardone and all kinds of different sales tricks and tips. And one of the things that stood out to me in one of Grant Cardone's books is he said, what's the difference between contract and contact? Contact, you have a contact in your book, right? You have a contact on your social media, your email list, whatever it is. And what's stopping that contact from becoming a client, right? It's the R. Contact, contract. The R is relationship. And if you build that relationship, that's what's going to lead to that. So don't think, oh, I'm just going to try to get the contract. I'm just trying to get the money. Go after the money. No, that's not what it's about at all.
Yeah, I love that. I've not heard that before, but I'm going to have to remember it. That's great. That just captures it so well. And it takes time. The other thing is you kind of have to, if you're meeting people that are at a level in their career where they're just getting experience, they're just starting out, they're not going to be decision makers for a while. And that's okay too. You've got to be able to kind of grow together and build that relationship. And then you kind of find when you reach our positions from a career development standpoint, that all of a sudden your whole network is starting to make decisions, right? And the deposits that you've made are bearing fruit.
And you have to remember, it's a long-term process, right? This stuff doesn't happen overnight. I mean, how long you've been in the business for years, right? But even with the Fidelity just taking over the past few years, right? 5 years or so, you've seen, I'm sure, right? Things come to fruition, which have taken a year or 2 or 3 or 5.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. The whole time that I've been here, right? There's things that are coming together this week that I've been working on for what feels like forever, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to be ready because you never know, but it's all about just continuing to build and develop those relationships.
Yeah. I mean, some people will call it, build the pipeline, build, things like that, but it's just continuing to add value, and that grows and grows and grows and grows and snowballs until it just starts coming in. And if you continue putting in and putting out, the more you put out, the more exponentially it grows. And so you can never really stop. That's the thing, right? Because once you stop, you kind of pull back the reins, there is a little bit of a lag sometimes. And, regardless, I mean, you talked about the most amazing years the industry has seen, right, in decades. And then the past year has been like one of the hardest years, we've seen in a long time. But that all comes with the territory. But if you're not continuing to build that, then you're going to be kind of left behind.
No, you're absolutely right. You got to keep your head in the game. And I think one great way to do that is with social media. I know you and I are both really active on LinkedIn, have found a ton of value professionally. One thing that I love about that is it's just an opportunity to really continue to be top of mind with this network. And you are adding value on an individual level, but sometimes that opportunity to add value means that they see you, remember that they need to call you and ask for help with something. And social media is just an incredible tool to keep track of a really large network. We couldn't do it without it,
We couldn't. I mean, one theoretically could, but I personally cannot see, how one can do it without it. Having, the more effort you put in, the more you get out, like I just said previously. But you see that so much more so when it comes to social media, because you just build this network, and every single person, if you treat them as a relationship and not just another follower, another connection, then that is unlimited opportunity because they are connected with other people, and you never know where that network and where those relationships build. And, getting out there also, you have your own podcast and, being a guest on podcasts, you put your name out there, people hear you. I always encourage the listeners of this show to reach out to our guests, afterwards, and reach out to them on LinkedIn, but don't just hit that connection button. Don't just hit that follow button, wherever it is on social media. Take 10 seconds and write a little note and say, I heard you on Weiss Advice, I heard you on Yona's podcast, or whatever. And that already starts a conversation, and that can go who knows where.
1,000%, right? You've got to follow it up, hit the message button. And it doesn't take much, right? Just something short and sweet, just meaningful. So it's not a sales pitch, because the sales pitch just through LinkedIn are kind of annoying.
It's more than annoying.
Yeah.
It's got to go. I mean, there's ways to get around it. I'm very careful, like who I accept the connection request from. But you know what? Sometimes they're very sincere. And actually someone just messaged me today, a long thing about, looking to be a guest on this show as a podcast. And typically I don't respond when they're just like random people reaching out. And if you have a podcast, this, that you literally, once you have a podcast, you get at least 1 or 2, sometimes up to 10 emails or messages about editing your podcast, or more importantly, like these connection services that suggest podcast guests for your show. And I think that's a very noble thing. And obviously there are people out there who realize the power of being on podcasts and being a guest on podcasts. And therefore you hire a service to, try to get you on those shows. I see that very noble. I personally only invite people on my show who I know already, and I want to have a continuing conversation with. But I had someone message me a very long message, which was like, totally copy and paste, right? And, I just messaged them back, like, is this you or your VA? And he messaged back very quickly, this is me, is just, and even this is a copy and paste I'm sending out to, become guests. I'm like, we've spoken before, we've had conversations, like we know each other. Don't send a message like that, a copy and paste, to someone that you already have a relationship with. It makes no sense whatsoever. I'd be happy to have him as a guest on the show, right? Mm-hmm. And because I hadn't thought of him already, doesn't mean that I didn't want to invite him. But again, going back to building that relationship it would be so much more conducive is like, he just sent a real message. Hey, Yona, I've enjoyed our conversations in the past. I'd love to be a guest on your show. Are you accepting guests? And I would answer, yes, absolutely. Come on the show. I don't need the whole, the whole 9 yards, what he posted about, the topics he could talk about, et cetera. So that's just another little rant there. It's not usual that I rant. I don't know what's going on with me today, but
Yeah.
it must be the mood.
Yeah, it feels transactional though, right? And it underscores the point that we were just talking about. Like, hey, we have a relationship. Like, don't make me feel like a number all of a sudden.
Exactly. Now, I didn't get rubbed the wrong way because I actually like this person. He's a good guy. We've had conversations before, but it's something that people overlook. You think like everyone is the same and you just kind of send out those messages like copy and paste. And maybe he wasn't even paying attention. And maybe it was, an automated thing. People have these automated things also. I get it.
Right.
But you kind of missed the point. I'm a little more easygoing. So, I obviously took it with a grain of salt and gave him some constructive criticism, which he accepted gracefully. But it's about having those real conversations. So when you message someone that you heard them on this podcast, send a really, very short, genuine message. I loved you on the show or whatever, or I didn't like you on the show or whatever it is, but just make it real.
Yeah. I hope to get 100 of those after this show. I would love that.
At least. So everyone listening to this, make sure we're going to put Tayler's information in the show notes. We're going to mention at the end of the show. But before we do that, I'd love to transition to what we call the final four. And these are 4 questions that I love to ask all my guests. First one for you is, what is the worst job that you ever had?
Yeah, you gave me an opportunity to think about this. And I've had some difficult jobs growing up, especially that were really physically demanding. At the time, I would have sworn that was the worst job. But as I've gotten older and had some experience and carried a few different jobs, I realized that those physically demanding jobs taught me so much in my life, and I'm really thankful for them. A couple of those, concrete worker, house framer in Rexburg, Idaho, which has 9 months of winter, picked rocks for, my uncle for a summer and hauled hay. Those were all really challenging physically, but I'm so thankful for them. And now I'm looking for ways to manufacture similar experiences for my kids. So I actually don't think I would say that those would be the ones that would fit the bill anymore. The most challenging experience for me really was my first year and a half as an associate attorney at a law firm. It wasn't necessarily the law firm that was the problem. It was just the massive miss from what I was looking for professionally and what I was getting from that segment of the legal field. I was working in civil litigation. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not great with confrontation. I love to write. I don't love to argue. And I'm not, a lot of attorneys love the details. I'm much more of a big picture guy. And so I was in a position where I needed to argue. I needed to be in the details. I needed to strategically think about how I could make the lives of the other side miserable. Like, none of that felt good for me. And it created this opportunity where it forced me to break from the conventional wisdom, where if you're an attorney, you go to a great law school and you clerk for a circuit court judge, and then you work at a law firm. And finally, I had to say, Tayler, you're not the same. You don't have to fit the bill. You don't have to be fall within the conventional wisdom. And it got so much so to that point that I was finally able to do that and have found a really rewarding and engaging career thereafter. So I'm thankful for the experience, but that was definitely the
for sure. And sometimes it's those, it's not necessarily the job itself, it's kind of where it puts you and the trajectory it kind of starts off for you. So you have to be grateful for all those things. So I love that. Second question, what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift?
This one's an easy one for me. Beginning of this year, I read 10X is Easier Than 2X. Ben Hardy's one of the authors. The idea is, rather than trying to double your revenue, you say, what would it take to times it by 10? The whole point of the book is a paradigm shift about how you run your business. And I sat down and I said, all right, I know where our revenue was at in 2023. What would it take to 10X it? And I made a list of the different actions I would need to take. And none of them were things that I was focused on, in the previous year exclusively. And so it was a mindset shift, and I've been working on implementing that. And now we're 10 months in, and I can definitely say that it's changed the way that I do business and how I spend my time. And I'm really thankful for that book and what it helped me do.
Amazing. Yeah, we've had that book mentioned a couple of times. I have yet to read it. I'm a big fan of Benjamin Hardy, of some of his other books. Who Not How is a great one. We've mentioned that a lot on the show as well. But I'll definitely have to check that out. I totally hear the idea and I relate with it. And I think I'm very much aligned with that. But I'd love to kind of read the book and just kind of get more practical tips on how to implement that. So definitely adding that to the book list, and we'll put that in the show notes for anyone who wants to check that as well. And the third question for you is, what is a skill or talent that you would like to learn?
From a practical standpoint, I would actually love to code. I don't know.
Something a lot of people love to do, but yeah.
I don't know that that's something that people need to learn as much anymore with the advent of AI and all the support it provides from a coding standpoint. But I've done a little bit of coding work in Excel in my undergraduate experience, and it's just something that I'd never followed through on completely. Very little bearing on what I do on a day-to-day basis now. So if we're talking more here and now, I would say I'd like to get better at saying no to things.
Wow. Okay. Well, then we'll hope you are able to do both of those. I mean, they're both extremely very different in a lot of ways, but also extremely important skills to have. So definitely hear that. Fourth and final question, what does success mean to you?
Success is time freedom for me. I think at the end of the day, we all have one trip around the sun, and I've got a family that I care about and, work that I love to do. And I mean, I feel old saying this, but I'm 38, and you start to recognize, like, I'm not always going to be fit and active forever.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not always going to be able to do these things that I take it for granted for the first part of my life. And I want the time freedom to be able to spend my time how I feel is meaningful. And so that's what I'm looking for from a success standpoint, is to run a good enough business where I can just have 100% time freedom.
Absolutely. I think that's what a lot of people are looking after and looking for. So love that answer. Finally, Tayler, as we mentioned earlier, we'd love for you to share where or how our listeners can find you or reach out to you.
I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X, and I took the advice that I got at CREI Summit a couple of years ago to unify my handles. So Tayler W. Tibbitts on all those platforms, and you can find me.
Awesome. And it's Tayler, Tayler. I'm sure you get that mixed up often.
All the time. Not anymore.
And we'll make sure to put the spelling, obviously, in the show and in the show notes as well. So I appreciate you coming on the show. It's really been great. Love meeting you in person last month, and just grateful for the relationship.
Well, me too, Yana. Thank you so much for having me on the show. And anything I can do for you, just let me know.
You got it. We will. And to our listeners, you guys have been awesome, listening all the way to the end. Once again, love that you keep coming back for more. And tell your friends, and make sure to connect with Tayler and myself if you're not already following in all the social platforms. And remember, until next time, the best advice comes only when you ask.
Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.